everybody, and welcome back to Spilling Tea with the G's. Again, I'm Nick Galarakis, along with our brother Steve Galarakis, and we have two outstanding guests today, Dr. Stefanie Thomas, or Steph, as we like to call her, and Whitney Hadley, both two medical professionals here in the Cleveland, Ohio area with us. Steph is at the Cleveland Clinic as the AYA oncologist, and Whitney Hadley is the AYA social program coordinator at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospitals at University Hospitals in Cleveland, and also a childhood cancer survivor. So Steve, we were fortunate to have them both on and talk a little about what it's like to be on the medical profession side of things.
Yeah, it's a really good conversation we got to have with them. We got to touch on subjects and topics that aren't normally spoken about in our community. And also, for those of you who you'll find out, Whitney and Steph are very good friends of ours, and they've been involved with this community for a very long time, and their insights are truly invaluable. And so it was a really wonderful conversation. I hope you all get a lot out of it like I did.
Awesome. All right, folks, we'll sit back, relax, and enjoy our interview with Steph and Whitney. Take care. All right, so we are here again with Whitney and Stefanie. And I'm going to embarrass myself, Steph or Stefanie. We keep calling you Steph because we know you so well. Do you prefer to go by Steph or Stefanie?
I like Steph better, actually.
Steph better. There we go. All right, cool. So is it Whit or Whitney? This is bad.
Or is it Whitney?
Oh, I see. I apologize.
Whatever works for you.
Whatever works. You're not even gonna. Or Hadley. I called you Hadley today. All right, let's get into it. So again, thank you both for being on with us. We're back, Spilling Tea with the G's. It's been a hot second since we've done an episode for a multitude of reasons, but let's just start off, Whitney and Steph, if you don't mind, just kind of introducing yourselves, who you are and what you do, and we'll go alphabetically by last name. So Whitney, I'm going to have you go first.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Whitney. I am the Adolescent Young Adult Support Specialist at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio. I am, as of next week, a 24-year cancer survivor. And I work with AYA patients really from 12 years up until about 40, offering support, connecting them to resources. Pre-COVID, when I could just hang out in the hospital more often, I would spend time sitting with patients and talking with them, seeing what kinds of needs they had, connecting them to peers and whatever types of resources they need.
Awesome.
Cool. And you're a board member.
Oh, Whitney. Yeah, and I'm on the board of the Stephen G. Cancer Foundation.
You got it right on the first time. There we go. We changed our name up. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Whitney.
I'm Steph, or Stefanie, or Dr. Thomas, I guess. I am also a board member of the Stephen G. Cancer Foundation, which is very exciting. And I'm also located in Cleveland, but at the other hospital, I'm the director of AYA oncology program at Cleveland Clinic Children's. I am a pediatric oncologist by training. I did extra training to focus on the adolescent and young adult oncology population and focus and taking care of patients with mostly sarcomas, and help really run our AYA consult service, which is to provide support services similar to what they do over at Rainbow Babies. And I'm just excited to be here today. Hello.
Awesome.
Oh, I should also say I've known Nick and Steve forever. Yeah, like a really long time.
We're going back to the St. Demetrius days in Rocky River, Ohio.
You definitely know me, Stefanie, since I was born. So
I would say, and probably Nick too, because I think I might be at least a few months older, or a year older than Nick.
Yeah, I know you were a grade ahead of me in grade school.
Yeah, I think I was between you and Phil. The third G.
The third elusive G that is out there somewhere. Yeah, we go way back, and even Whitney, goes way back with the G family too, but not as far back as
no, maybe like 3 years.
Oh, more than that, Whitney.
No. How long have you been in Cleveland?
It'll be 3 years in July.
All right, it's 3 years.
Wow, it's only been that long?
I know.
Feels like an eternity.
Gotten to know you way too well.
That's fair. Very fair. No, actually, you're right, because when we were launching Elephants in Tea, I think you were pretty brand
That
spanking
was my
new,
second
right?
day of work when you came and talked about it.
There you go.
Really?
Yeah, because that's when Angie and I went and sat down. We did some focus groups, and the group over at Rainbows was one of the first groups we talked with. And I remember that's right. Yeah, they were like, here's our new toy, basically, is what they were saying for the patients, that they have a new AYA coordinator. And were you the first AYA coordinator technically over there, or no? Am I making that up?
Amelia Baffa did a lot of the AYA coordination. I'm the first social worker in that role.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's what
She was a nurse navigator, so she was more on the nursing side.
So we knew you as long as we knew Elephants in Tea. How about that? There we go.
There we go.
Even before we knew Elephants in Tea, because we didn't know the name then, that's for sure, I don't think. But
I did not.
anyways, well, thank you both so much again for being on here. We can make fun of each other all day long, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so in this episode as well. So let's kind of just get right into it. And I think it's really cool that both of you, being from Cleveland, for those people who don't know, we are based here in Cleveland, Ohio as well. And I know Steph, you started in Cleveland, grew up here, went to USC for work for a while, then came back. So it's pretty cool. Your path, a roundabout way back to Cleveland Clinic and Whitney, growing up in New York, came here to Cleveland. So I'm going to go with Steph for this first question, I guess, or second question to introduce yourselves. But the why oncology, why pediatric oncology, or AYA oncology, if you will, Steph, if you want to kind of kick us off with that question, then we'll go to Whitney next.
I feel like I could talk about this for a really long time, so I'm going to try to shorten it if possible. So I feel like when I decided I wanted to do medicine, first I should say I have a very limited understanding of jobs. So if you're not in a service profession, like a police officer or a firefighter or a nurse or doctor, I really have no idea what you do. Like people that are like bankers or work in like advertising, like no clue. So let's just start with that. So I was pretty much going to go into some type of service profession because that made sense to me. And I knew that I was liking sciencey stuff and math stuff and then people. And so that led me to medicine because I mostly liked people more than any of that. And so I was thinking about going into medicine and liked working with kids, especially. And through a series of honestly unfortunate events of family members being diagnosed either as children and then passing away as teenagers, or diagnosed as teens, and then a few closer family members being diagnosed as young adults, and one particularly with something very rare that he needed to travel throughout the country to try to find clinical trials for his rare disease, and then ultimately passing away from it. Those all hit me at different aspects of my training. So I first encountered teen cancer as a teen with a family member, and then as a kind of college student, early med school, and then during my third year of medical school, again with a family member as a young adult being diagnosed, and watching him go through the surgeries and the and just the appointments and the scanxiety and all of that. And then once I decided I wanted to do pediatrics with this family member that got diagnosed as a young adult during my residency and needing to travel, that's what really kind of pushed me towards wanting to be an advocate for this particular population of working with adolescents and young adults. And I love working with teenagers. They're fun. They're always super interesting. There's always like just really cool shit that they're doing. And you learn so much when you get to hang out with them. And it's a real special job where you get to be this like intimately involved person in these lives for hopefully long periods of time, sometimes short periods of time, but in really intense ways. And so it's not a job that most people get to have, and I'm thankful for it. That's me.
Thank you, Steph. Whitney?
So obviously my experience as a survivor has always kind of been like underpinning everything that I've done. I was in grad school for a really long time. I have a master's in bioethics, and then I went on to kind of look into a PhD in bioethics, was there for 3 years and decided I wanted to do something more tangible that could actually, I could touch more people's lives. Kind of like what Steph was saying, that you're a part of someone's life and you're able to do a lot for someone and get to know them really intimately. So I ended up going and getting a master's in social work, and worked in some nonprofits and stumbled upon my position here through attending CancerCon at Stupid Cancer. But I also kind of at the same time was going through some other health issues where it ended up being benign, but anxiety. When I was sick originally, I was 10, so I don't remember a lot of that as much. And so 5 or 6 years ago, when I was going through all that stuff, it was one thing after another and not knowing what any of it meant, but also knowing what it meant, and being able to understand what was happening, but not have any answers. And so I lived that experience of just the diagnosis process was months. And so when I eventually connected with Amelia and connected with people from Rainbow, I had gone to grad school in Cleveland for a year. So I was familiar with the area and it all kind of aligned. And I would echo exactly what Steph said, that working in this population, you can build these relationships and offer support in a very different way. Everyone's got the coolest stories. And so helping navigate the story that they came into the cancer world with, and reconciling that with their cancer experience is really what kind of fills me up every day.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you both for sharing that a little bit behind the scenes. I think for if any of your, people you work with or patients that see that, and, I think it's interesting too, for both of you, just the way you looked at jobs in general. Whitney, how you said something more tangible, you wanted to do that. Steph not having any comprehension of anything outside of being a doctor or a servicing first responder, if you will, which is just hilarious. So hopefully you both know what I do for a living, since I'm neither of those, running our nonprofit, but that would be awkward. Kind of, sort of, not really. Don't know what you do today. That's another conversation for the day. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I was just going to say, we know you're not the pretty face of the group either, so.
Well, neither are you anymore,
Neither
right?
am I. So.
Oh my goodness gracious. So, I think it's interesting too, when in talking with people in the medical profession, it's either you love working with teenagers or you hate working with teenagers. I don't think I've ever heard an in-between point with that. Having a wife who's a nurse practitioner in pediatrics as well, I know her reasonings behind it. But it's just so interesting to me the way that you both put it, that the stories are just so interesting. When you do work with patients at a younger age, right, where they have such a serious diagnosis or disease that is cancer, do you think that plays into at all the fact of trying to see them succeed and grow with life, or is there a different reason that you do work with this age group? Does my question make sense? Like, you can see someone recover, is what I've heard from people at this age. People that are older, you don't. Sorry.
I think when
terrible word question. I apologize.
I think with younger kids, I think what makes teens so special is they're this like emerging independence, right? Where you are watching their interactions with their family members, and it's in some ways extremely painful because you're more reliant on family than you were before, and you're kind of forced back into that role, and you have to try to navigate that working with parents and with teens. But at the same time, that emerging independence is what makes their stories so cool, and what makes them, you get to actually work through like decision-making processes with them. I think with younger kids, as much as, and we started at really 11, or even 7 that we want kids to really understand if they're being part of like research protocols and trying to understand like what's going on with their own bodies and everything. And so there's a little bit of that, but you're still much more appropriately reliant on your parents. And so a lot of it is still working with parents rather than working with the kids themselves. And I think you get to see that growth with teens too. It's just a little bit different. It's not, I mean, like Whitney said, she doesn't remember a lot of what happened when she was 10, but a 15-year-old, Steve probably can say this, will remember what upfront therapy was like. And so that even that short amount of time can make a really big difference on how that cancer experience shapes future lives, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think too, with that independence, it's really cool to be a part of kind of pulling that out of someone, that a lot of times this is an experience. It's the first time that they've had to really use their independence in such a powerful way. And so being able to be the person supporting that and allowing someone to come up with what their opinions are and figure out how to voice that can be a really powerful experience.
Awesome.
So kind of going off of, those questions there and working with, the AYA population that you guys do, I was thinking here, we group teenagers and young adults together in this kind of, single group, AYA, adolescent young adults. But as you alluded to, when you're a teenager, you don't really have full independence. Obviously, you're still under the age of 18, you're still reliant on your parents for everything. And so I guess as a provider, do you see trying to figure out how to word this, I don't fumble like my brother. But, there's this sense of, when I was diagnosed at 15, they kept things from me. They didn't tell me how severe my cancer was, the doctors, they didn't tell me until I was doing better. And again, and obviously as an adult, they tell you everything up front. So, but where I'm leading with this question, I guess I kind of did a roundabout way there, was that one of the things that I experienced as a teenager and as an adult, and less as an adult, when you bring up problems you're having as a patient, do you take everybody at their word? Teenagers, we tend to think of teenagers as flaky, as not, reliable. So, working with this population, do you, is that something that you take into account, in terms of how you handle what the patient tells you based on whether they're a teenager or a young adult?
Both of your facial expressions while you was asking those was fantastic. So I can't wait to hear the responses. No pressure.
Well, I'm mostly bothered because you weren't told like prognosis stuff when you were a teen. And I think that is probably more provider dependent than necessarily. I mean, I guess it is age dependent, but also provider dependent. I personally start all conversations, even with kids as young as, 11, 12, 13, with I want to answer all of your questions, but I don't want to tell you too much because I don't want to stress you out. But if you ask me something flat out, I promise I won't lie to you. So like just the beginning of the conversation. And if your parents want to know something flat out and they don't want to ask you in front of me, they might ask me in the hallway. But if I come back in here and you say, I want to know what you guys talked about, then I'll tell you what we talked about. There's no, like, that's just how this works. And I tell them that usually in front of parents, and I tell them it's because their parents know them best. And so there are some kids that right now don't want a lot of information, and that's cool. Like, I want to meet you where you are, but I also promise that I won't hide things from you that you want to know. So, because I do think there's, developmentally, there is differences between a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old, and just having the emotional maturity is, and it's different from kid to kid. So I do think you need to take that into account, but it does bother me that you didn't know things until you're doing better. In regards to the believing kids, I always believe patients, and at least I hope I come off that way, and I certainly try to. And I don't think, and if parents and kids are telling me two separate things, because that's usually when that happens, when you get that situation where you're like, oh, the parents are telling me something and the kid's telling me something else. And a lot of times it's the kids feel like they're telling, the truth, and the parents think that they're basically not saying that they have as many side effects as they do, or vice versa. I try to get them to talk to each other with me in there about like what they're actually seeing instead of like severity stuff, and try to work through that. But it's a teen's, it's your body. So I feel like you have to be believed more than anybody. That makes sense?
Yeah, and before I have Whitney answer that kind of question too, let me preface also, when I was diagnosed, I was in so much pain. They had me on so many narcotics. They might have told me. My mom could probably speak better to that.
So I was actually just going to jump in and say that I distinctly remember a conversation where I'm not sure if our older brother was there, Phil, or not, but I know I was sitting there with my parents talking to Steve's oncologist at the time, and she did say to them that there were things I think mom and dad actually didn't want her to tell you. And she was like, if he asks, I am telling him these answers. So for what it's worth, I specifically remember that conversation. So as you said, Steve, your state of mind. One thing we have found out, Whitney and Steph, is when Steve, myself, and Phil have reflected on things, in especially Steve's first cancer, of what did or didn't happen at different times, is absolutely hilarious. Because there are times that, for example, I forgot that Steve actually had a reoccurrence in his lungs from his first cancer. Completely like blanked that out. But anyway, there's different things we can go on and on about that. Well, Whitney's feedback on Steve's question too, but there were things I will say that the provider was like, no, if Steve does ask me these, I am going to tell him. Steve, repeat your question for Whitney, I have a feeling.
Oh, so I guess I'll do it more concisely. Concisely is not a word. Concisely.
There we go.
Do you, I guess to kind of play off of the way Steph answered it, do you treat people different based on being a teenager or a young adult? And then, do you take their, depending on their age, do you interpret what they tell you differently?
Not really. I have different programs for different ages. We're not going to have a 13-year-old in the same group as a bunch of 20-year-olds. But I don't treat anyone differently based on their age, and I certainly want to write off what anyone's saying, because usually the conversations that I'm having are kind of a spin-off of what other people have identified someone needs. So if someone is meeting with the psychologist or the clinical psychiatrist, and they could use some extra support, then I'm the person that then follows up and checks in on someone, sees what's going on, what they might need. I do notice some patterns in like what, for example, our teen survivors really need and want to talk about versus what our young adult patients and survivors really want to talk about. Like the two different groups that we have are totally different. One's talking about cancer and one is not talking about cancer. But for the most part, I take the lead from whatever it is that they need to talk about or want to talk about.
Awesome.
Cool. What would you say both of your favorite parts is about your job?
I think for me, it's the stories, hearing people's story, hearing what their hopes and dreams are and how they can kind of rewrite what those hopes and dreams are in light of what they're going through, whether that's totally shifting and coming up with something new, or how to integrate their current experience or their experience with cancer into their future, because that's something that was certainly a journey for me. And so it's the stories are the most interesting and most exciting part of my work.
Same. Just gonna steal your answer.
Probably why we're on the same call.
Right? That's like, I feel like medicine in general is storytelling. It's like storytelling with science, because what we do in history and physical, where we talk to patients and we ask them what's going on, and then we kind of hear what's going on in their life and how that impacts their life. And since you are you have this crazy intimate relationship where you're seeing these patients weekly or twice a week for a year or longer sometimes, you really get to know on a day-to-day basis what's going on with the girl that they met online, what is happening with their sister that they're worried about, or their brother that they're arguing with, or how's their relationship with their parents, or did they get to see their grandparents? Like you get into this real minutia of like what is everyday life, but in the lens of refocusing priorities based on the situation that they're going through. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And so going 180 degrees from that question, we all know that oncology every day isn't happy, so I guess my question here is how do you deal with the sad days? The days that don't turn out the way that you want them to, the day that stories end.
Well, that just brought the room down, Steve.
That's probably, we're going to call that Steve's curveball question for Stilling 2.
Yeah, you promised that curveball, and there it is.
That was more like a knuckleball.
And if you don't really have an answer for it, that's okay, because we all handle grief differently.
And out here, let me even throw this out there too, before you give you guys a second to maybe even think of how you want to phrase your response to that. I have heard oftentimes from other providers, other medical professionals, that there are times that they're almost forgotten about, especially during the grieving process as well, that you all have to essentially pick up and move on to the next patient. There's really no time to kind of process what has happened. And I know for us, in talking with these providers that have brought this up to us, we're looking at ways to try to provide their stories to the community as well, right? Because I think that a lot of the times, and no offense to Whitney, but especially the oncologist side are really kind of forgotten on what that goes through with them day in and day out, where I feel like the social work side, the coordinator, program manager side, they're still more involved with those conversations. So that's just been very interesting for me to have those conversations with people, just as far as the feelings that are kind of left behind or even forgotten about. So I'll let you guys take it from there.
That was gonna be my elephant in the room. So I might,
there we go.
Repeat this, but I think
that's okay.
I think so for me, I had a crap day on Friday. It's just a crappy day. It was a crappy day in clinic. And it, wasn't, the scans weren't what we wanted the scans to be. The labs weren't what we wanted the labs to be. Like nothing was working out like it was supposed to, unless perfect cancer map that doesn't actually ever happen. And and it sucks. And there's not, I cope mostly. So I have not figured out a way to cope in the moment. I don't think it's possible. I think you end up bottling and having to deal and process things later. I think like what Nick said, there's always another patient waiting. There's always something else that you have to go do, and you have to finish. And so I bottle, and then I end up usually talking, I called one of my best friends, and it was just helpful. And this is someone who's another pediatric oncologist at another hospital, so doesn't know exactly the situation that's going on, doesn't know the patients, doesn't know specifics, but gets it. And I think there are very few people who get it. I think most people will try to, and it's out of extreme kindness, but will try to be like, oh, how can you possibly do this job? Or even my parents, are you sure this is for you? Maybe you can still be a general pediatrician. Every time that you try to talk about something like that. So you need that special group. And I started therapy last week. So I think that is something that honestly, everyone that's in this field probably should be in some type of therapy, and help work with someone to help process your emotions and kind of things that you're going through on a daily basis. So yeah.
Thank you, Steph.
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of a bunch of trial and error of identifying that it's important to take some time to process it, because definitely not the same as what Steph was saying. I'm not, as in high demand as she is, but when there is a bad day, sometimes it can kind of bottle it to get through the day, and then you bring it home with you and it can just kind of linger. And so I'm still in the process of kind of figuring out what types of things work best for me. I've noticed moving my body helps me kind of separate. I've, for a long time, started working out after like the end of my day to separate from work. It just clears my head for a little bit. But it does take time, I think, to work through it. I've been journaling a lot, and I'm starting therapy next week.
Well, and I really appreciate both of you, talking about it, because I know it's not an easy thing to talk about. And the reason I asked the question is, we tend to, as cancer patients, we tend to focus on ourselves. And obviously there's a reason why we focus on ourselves, but there are people, siblings, family members who get forgotten, but especially the medical providers who deal with this day in and day out and never get to leave that world. And so I think it's really important that the patients don't forget that and understand that, yes, when something terrible happens to our family or one of us, the family grieves and they move on and they don't have to deal with it necessarily anymore. Obviously you have to grieve, but then you have to come back to that same world the next day and the day after that. And I think it's important that people understand that, yeah, there's a separation of who we are, patients, caregivers, family, but we all have to deal with that grief and in different ways. And I don't want us as patients to forget what our providers go through.
And I have to say though, Steve, I was going to say, sorry, Whitney, that I feel like the patients and the families, like the core family, get it. I think there, you guys all know this, like there's core family that are there every single step of the way. And sometimes it's only one person. Sometimes it's, a group, a small group. And then usually when there's like big things happening, like a big surgery happening or a bad outcome happening or something, then there's like the bigger family that kind of come in and have lots of opinions that have not been there the entire time. But I think that core family and the patients, they get it, because I had a young adult recently tell me, I'm so sorry, this must be hard for you to be the bearer of bad news. I had a grandma a few years ago, after her young adult granddaughter died, put her hand on my leg and say, I know this is so hard for you too, because we know you really loved her. I think that group that's with you, that has been interacting with you throughout the entire time, especially if you develop that relationship with the family, they get it. And I can tell you, I think sometimes those comments are actually the hardest when you have either a family member like thank you after their child died, or say like a teen acknowledging that in their moment of having like the worst news delivered to them, that they're thinking about you as a human too. That actually kind of, it's really hard. Like you kind of just want them to be like, no, focus on you. Like, cool. Like I chose to do this. This is my job. I do think that the vast majority of patients and families really do care about that medical provider. And in terms of like end of life, I think going to funerals and wakes is really important for me personally. I know some people don't like to do it, but for me, that is something that I've always liked to do. And that's something that I missed during COVID. Because we haven't been able to have that, like any of those real end type of boundary things. That didn't make any sense in the end, but yeah.
Closure to a certain extent, right?
That's the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whitney,
I was just gonna say that I think for providers, a lot of times it's the harder part is allowing ourselves like that time to decompress and to grieve more than anything, because we're so used to helping other people and turning the focus off of us, that often, like you just said, Steph, like those moments where people turn it to you can feel really hard because we're people who are caring for other people. So then when it comes time to care for ourselves, it can be a little bit more of an uphill battle.
Well, and other reason why I say that is because as a patient, unfortunately, when you're in the hospital, I expect that you all, nurses, doctors, social workers, be at 100% no matter what's going on in your life. And sometimes I feel that that expectation is very unfair. Now, again, you're dealing with life and death situations, and you want your provider to be at their A game, but there has to be an understanding from the patients that if someone's a little upset that day, they're dealing with some shit. They're dealing with other patients who are not doing well, have bad news and things. And so I think it's just very important that the whole circle of oncology, of the cancer world, be understood, and not just the patients and the family.
Thank you both for opening up on all that, because I think that's extremely important, not just for people listening, but for yourselves too, right? The fact that you both have admitted to going to therapy or starting therapy, I think is huge. And just also it's something, practice what you preach to a certain extent too, right? I think that's really cool. Okay, the last big question for you is, what is your elephant in the room? And I think we kind of maybe started talking about that a little bit, and it's okay, Steph, in particular, if we already kind of talked a little about your elephant in the room, if you want to, elaborate on either one, whether you want to go that same direction or a different elephant in the room. It's something we ask all of our guests, what is the big elephant that no one wants to talk about necessarily or gets forgotten about?
Whitney, you go first.
Okay. I think mine is that as a cancer survivor, cancer is always in your life. So for me, it's long-term side effects, it's medications, it's sometimes not feeling well, it's having low energy, and there's just always something that comes up. Steve, I think that's something that I think the medical community is really good about, and survivors certainly learn it the hard way. But outside of kind of the small little world, people have no idea. So I think that's definitely, for me, the elephant in the room.
I will probably stick with what I was going to say, which is more of the medical professionals' mental health, and what Nick was saying on you have to kind of keep moving from thing to thing. In moments where patients die in the hospital and you are on hospital service, there are times where I and others, have cried in a stairwell or in a bathroom, and then have been had to say, okay, put yourself together, you still have to go around. And I think for me, as someone who chose this profession, and I knew that coming into it, I can do that, and that's what's expected of me, and that's great. But I do worry about our trainees, and especially our residents, which I think most children are treated in an academic children's hospital. And I personally believe most AYA should be treated, or at least should get opinions from an academic medical center, depending on the diagnosis, but most of them probably should at least be seen. And I do think sometimes teens and young adults with cancer and cancer parents can be a little hard on our residents and on our trainees that are trying to learn and take care of patients. And I think that is particularly difficult for someone who isn't going to be going into this profession. And I think it's also for nursing students, psychology students, anyone who is really learning about this, but isn't making that as a life choice, and something that I think we need to really be focusing on.
Awesome. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to ask, do these academic hospitals, do they actually provide that kind of therapeutic support to people when they're in training?
I know our hospital does. So, and I know the hospital that I was at before started to, or kind of does. I think it's more emerging than it was before. So it exists. I think Whitney's point of making the time to do it, though, is what is really hard a lot of times, because it's sometimes ends up being another thing that you have to do. And when you're a trainee, you're already working a lot of hours, way more hours than I work. And it is prioritizing that can be difficult. And so if there was a way to integrate it better into kind of things that are already happening, that I think would be an ideal situation.
Awesome. Well said, both of you. Thank you for sharing your elephants in the room with us. Thank you for sharing. I mean, we hit the gamut, I think, on the emotions there. We went high, we went low, somewhere in between. I think, those that know me, I try to leave it on a more of a high note sometimes, and I'm going to do more of a joking way since both of you have, Steph's from Cleveland, left Cleveland, came back, and Whitney's from Rochester. I almost said Buffalo, Whitney, and I think you like, exactly.
Oh, Syracuse.
Syracuse.
You were wrong, Nick.
Right. I knew she would get angry if I got it wrong.
Apparently he doesn't know you, Whitney. Apparently he
Doesn't know me.
No. So, Whitney, do you prefer Syracuse or Cleveland? No pressure.
Throwing her on the spot. Wow.
They're very, very similar. I don't know how to answer that. My whole family's in Syracuse, but I like Cleveland.
Syracuse does have the original Addams Family house.
You can leave it with that if you want. Your family's in
I
Syracuse.
like both equally.
There you go. Now, Steph, being that you were in Los Angeles for a long time and that is it snowing right now? Let me see.
Mm-hmm.
I think it stopped snowing, but we got a lot of snow.
What's
snowing here? Snowing on the west side.
So it's coming to the east side. Got it. So LA or Cleveland?
They're also very similar places, just like Syracuse and Cleveland. Syracuse, Cleveland, Los Angeles, all basically the same. There are things that I very much miss about Los Angeles a lot. But my family's here, and my niece came over and we had a dance party in my basement this weekend. So that was pretty fantastic.
It's hard to beat that.
Yeah.
It's hard to beat that. I just remember having a conversation with Steph about the weather and how you're like, oh, it's worth every penny of it being more expensive to live there, to have the sunshine essentially 24/7.
There's just so much sun in Cleveland.
So much. So much. I think
too much to handle.
I'm willing to bet there's more sun in Syracuse than there is in Cleveland.
They're in the lake effect weather area, man. That's
I don't know. That would be an interesting thing to look up. We got to get Al Roker on that one.
Here we go.
He's from Cleveland.
The more you know. Yes, he is.
Right. Al Roker's from Cleveland.
Yes.
And he went to school just outside of Syracuse.
Oh, he should know the answer. Can we tag Al Roker and ask him if he knows?
Yes.
Why not? See what happens. It's just social media, right? What can happen?
On Twitter.
Whitney, you going to tweet it for us?
No, Steph can.
Oh,
I don't tweet.
I know, that's why I said. All right. Well, both of you, much love. Thank you so much. And for those that are watching, this will be released prior to our first ENT in the CLE. So we're super excited about that, having a virtual hangout and at some point in person with everyone in the Cleveland, Northeast Ohio area when this whole thing called COVID somewhat slows down and vaccines and all that craziness. But Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern, right, ladies? I think that's what we said. Yeah, 6 p.m. So super excited for that. And looking forward to it. Whitney and Steph, thank you both so much for coming on with us today. And thank you both again for all that you do for the AYA cancer community and the patients and their families. And of course, for the Stephen G. Cancer Foundation. You two are rock stars.
And before we go real quickly, Nick, can you let people know who are watching from Cleveland where they can find out about the Elephants and Tea and the CLE?
Yes, go to elephantsandtea.com or follow our social media. So there you go. We will have it in the more area on our website. It is there. All righty, cool. Thanks everybody. See you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.